Hello everyone. Let us look at some interesting points from the book Reset by Swamiji. This is a wonderful book with reasons for our slow growth in the past and pathway to rapid growth in the future. India's share of world GDP was 24% in 1700 AD, which fell to 4.2% in 1950. According to calculations in the book, Indian wealth drained by Britain was $71 trillion. $71 trillion is 27 times more than the total annual GDP of Britain today. This systematic loot happened through the rigged trade system, the Jamindari revenue extraction mandate, and the collection made through taxes and levies imposed on Indians for British expenses incurred during World War One and Two. In fact, cost of all Britain's war of conquest outside Indian borders was charged always wholly or mainly to Indian revenues. By these $71 trillion, India developed Britain by financing India's industrial revolution, the British administration, and Britain's major wars. This drain of wealth brings us to Jamindars or comprador class of money lenders, as it is called in the book. They saw their role naturally as serving their English masters, from whom they drew their authority and received protection in return, and amassed wealth without contributing to productivity or taking any risk. The character of Indian colonial agricultural system was thus very feudal, not bureaucratic. The moneylender would extend loans in his individual capacity to the cultivator to enable him to pay the fixed revenue. These revenue collections were excessive, and hence the amount of land revenue grew by 25% between 1985 and 1900 and 21% between 1900 and 1947, while the output of grain declined. Interestingly, within British India, the wheat farmers of Punjab did not face the same hardships in land revenue. This is because in the late 1840s, after a series of wars, the Sikhs signed the Treaty of Lahore in 1846. One section of the Sikhs had sent soldiers to aid the British in crushing the rebellion of 1857 in Lucknow. Subsequently, the colonial government, as a political measure, enacted the Punjab Land Alienation Act of 1900 and the Rent Act to safeguard the rights of the peasant. Rents in Punjab, therefore, in sharp contrast to the rest of the country, could not be raised without a court order. This attitude of the colonial government towards Punjab is one of the most important reasons for the state becoming agriculturally better off than the rest of the country by the mid 20th century. Let us look at children of comprador. These India's children of comprador class, the children who had gone to England as students to get Oxbridge degrees and then entered the bureaucracy through the civil service examinations, a Soviet type socialist economy meant no loss of power over marshalling the resources of the economy. This future elite's control over the state by virtue of its privileged education meant strategic placement and positioning in the future independent government of India. By the interlocking of families through marriages, caste brotherhood, and cronyism, they ensured not only that, but they were also able to see to it that anyone who did not accept the socialist oligarchic dogma in Indian society found it difficult to secure any position of authority or even any employment. This feudal class, deprived of its land under the post independence abolition of Jamindari system, found that under this model it continued to enjoy patronage power in the socialist Indian economy. Now let us go to third. slide. So, what was the characteristics of these 5-year plans? So, economic planning was done through 5-year plans in the socialist setup. All of them have the following 6 characteristics of the Soviet economic strategy. Priority to capital goods sector on the supposition that supply creates its own demand. Squeezing agriculture through taxes, terms of trade, and credit deposit ratios of government banks to raise funds for financing industry. Heavy taxes on consumption to curb it. Import substitution measures. Controls and levies on finance such as banks, insurances, etc. Commanding heights of the economy in the public sector and a tight licensing system where, except petty trade, every major economic activity needed government approval or participation. This included inputs for production, output for sale, and availability of raw materials. Hence, it was referred to as commanding heights. Commanding heights brings us to another class in Indian society: rent earning losers from deregulation. These people, these were people who got used to captive markets, protectionist policies, and government directives and made money by selling subsidized, licensed, and quota based raw material and intermediate products to the private sector in the black market. As a result of pressure by them, most of the structural reforms were further delayed and diluted by governments after 96. As a consequence, industrial growth decelerated, export growth fell, and infrastructure bottlenecks have now become a major obstacle in the economy, while agriculture today exhibits massive instability and fluctuation in growth rates. Talking about agriculture, agriculture has been covered in great detail in the book. The poor and erratic performance of agriculture, especially in food crops and animal husbandry, was partly due to the out of the Green Revolution in the 1990s. This is attributed to the consistent neglect in the allocation of public investment in the sector. Since agriculture is basically a private sector of large number of poor cultivators, public investment has a critical role to play in creating infrastructure, roads, and markets, and besides facilitating education and healthcare for the rural people, that responsibility is of the government, which abdicated its duty to agriculture despite wide ranging reforms in other sectors. Now, let us look at the current scenario. First, we should look at what is causing the poor condition of economy today. So, we'll look at different points. The rising interest rate and falling fixed deposit rate has led to collapse of the MSME sector, resulting in the rise of unemployment to a 45-year high and a decline in the rate of saving and subsequently of investment to an alarmingly low level of 28% of GDP. Household savings, which is the bulk of national investment, dropped from a high of 34% of GDP to about 26% of GDP in 2017. Non-household savings are about 5% of GDP. This decline in investment rate began even before demonetization, and the decline continues because of intrusive and sometimes obnoxious tax measures. The country's investment to GDP ratio has remained stagnant at 28% for nearly 4 years after being 36% for the previous 5 years. This 36% too was a decline from a peak of 38% in 2008. The slowing of inflation cannot be celebrated as an achievement in the absence of robust demand signals and weak purchasing power among the masses. It is a form of deflation. Weak consumer demand is in fact crippling the industrial sector. The industrial growth rate has slowed down owing to many structural reasons, including high interest rates, discouraging loans, financing of investment, rising fuel prices, and lack of credit. The manufacturing sector is progressing at a slow growth rate of less than 5% per year because of lack of perceived demand, pressure from imports, debt stressed balance sheets, and poor implementation of GST that hurt the ease of doing business. India's twin deficit, fiscal deficit, and balance of payments current account deficit are likely to remain well below zero in the end, in the red and negative. Moreover, India's export growth has largely followed global trade growth over the past few decades and now is at an abysmal low rate. Now we talked about demonetization. So let us look at demonetization in a bit detail. According to CMI report released in January 2019, nearly 11 million people lost their jobs in 2018 after demonetization, and GST in 2017 hit millions of small businesses, driving them to closure and cut back business and cast general gloom about the future. There is a general consensus among experts that demonetization had a major negative effect on small businesses, workers, and farmers while leaving the rich virtually unaffected because of the class's ability to rig the system. 99.3% of currency coming back implies that even though there was 40% black money in the economy, tax evaders and criminals never held much of this wealth in cash holdings. Much of the large black money cash was managed through shell companies, foreign accounts, deposits in Jandan accounts, sending the money to Nepal to launder and then again return to India, or paying temple trust, cooperative banks, political parties, middlemen, or dubious godmen of all religions a small premium to launder the money. The enormous cost imposed by demonetization, which is over 1% of GDP, the near collapse of small scale industry, supply chain disruption, drop in employment, the multi seasonal effect of on the crop season, and the loss of livelihood due to the government's unpreparedness to change over to new notes is a governance horror. Now let us look at NBFC. Due to the excess liquidity in the system that was induced post demonetization, the NBFCs came to the forefront of lending in the last 3 years because the banks were struggling with the NPAs. The consumption rise, thus, in the past 3 years, was not driven by a rise in personal income, but because of a significant rise in lending by NBFCs and now has backfired. The current bad consumer story came to be only after the NBFC crisis erupted. NBFCs now have no money to service the deposits or recover the loans given. In the last few years of high inflow of cash, banks and investors have parked their money with mutual funds. This supply of cheap funds from banks and mutual funds in turn helped NBFCs double their loan portfolios. Eventually, NBFCs found themselves in mismatch between assets and liabilities, which has led to downgradings in rating and thus eventual defaults. Now, let us look at how to move forward. India has to grow at 10%, more than 10% to provide employment to masses. A comprehensive policy should be developed. Here are some immediate steps that government can take. The individual has to be persuaded by the government through incentives, for example, by abolishing the income tax and not by coercion, such as harsh levies and taxes. To raise the GDP growth rate to more than 10%, the rate of investment, including FDI, has to rise to 38% of GDP from the present 28%. Of this, household savings are the bulk of India's national savings at 80% of the total. But since 2016, household savings have dropped from high of 34% of GDP in 2014 to 28% of GDP in 2018, mainly due to the poor implemented demonetization. The decline in investment and the level of household saving thus caused a large decline in GDP growth rate, a concern that has not been addressed seriously in the budgets of 2016 to 19. Households have to be incentivized with the methods to raise savings back to 34% of GDP. Non-household savings today are about 5% of GDP. For fixed deposit in banks, the rate of interest should not be less than 9%. This will boost institutional and household savings in fixed deposits. Since the growth rate in GDP is calculated as equal to rate of total investment divided by productivity of capital, in order to achieve 10% growth rate in GDP, a household savings rate of 34% of GDP, a non-household saving rate of 5% of GDP, and a capital output ratio of not less than 3.9 of GDP is necessary. Thus, the higher the productivity in use of capital, the higher the GDP growth rate for the same level of investment. The efficiency in the use of capital is attained more easily by innovations that are introduced by the production technique and less so by reducing waste and efficiency. Shifting to a fixed exchange rate regime of 50 rupees per dollar for the year 2019 and then gradually lowering the exchange rate for subsequent years. Invoking the UN resolution of 2005 to bring back black money of about $1 trillion from abroad held illegally. Printing rupee notes to fully finance basic infrastructure and public works projects while keeping especially to pay wages of laborers and setting aside concerns about fiscal deficit ratio in the cold storage for the time being. You can read the book for more details and more insightful analysis on Indian economy. That brings us to the end of the video. Thank you.